because it would have triggered a nuclear war. Right now, it matters. We need to know this. Why did the president change his mind? We need to know this is what's going to happen. We're not bluffing. And thank God somebody close to Biden went, they ain't bluffing. To greenlight the use of Storm Shadow cruise missiles and American ATACMS missiles against targets inside Russia. I mean, and that didn't work. They still think he's bluffing. So I think one more phone call was made. And that's where the back channel was used. So again, it's sad what's happening to Ukraine. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Dennis Small, for your outstanding presentation. In fact, I should probably just yield the floor back to you because you were hitting everything perfectly. We are, I've been accused a lot lately of being an alarmist. Some people say, well, you're irresponsibly engendering fear. But I will say right now that if you are not scared to death, then you're the problem. I'm not the problem. If nuclear war and the prospects of nuclear war don't scare you, I don't know why you're here in this forum, and I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. There literally is no other issue today. No other issue today. I'm going to just emphasize that again because I know people out there feel strongly about very many other issues. There's no other issue today that's more important than preventing a nuclear war, and we almost had one last week. I don't know how, if people don't understand, Keir Starmer brought with him the documents, the target list. If Joe Biden had signed off on those documents, the target list, part of that target list would have been executed that night. British technicians are already in Ukraine loading target data onto the Storm Shadow missiles. These missiles right now are being used against targets in Novorossiya, in the former Ukrainian provinces of Lugansk, Kherson, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. Why? Because Ukraine, and again, it's right to say, they say this is our territory. Okay. Crimea, they say it's our territory. Okay. That's why Russia is not responding by threatening nuclear war when Storm Shadow missiles are used against those targets. This is a debatable point. Russian territory, however, outside of those 5 named areas, is Russian territory. It's sovereign territory, unquestionably sovereign territory. And any effort to use NATO-provided weapons, and it's not just NATO-provided weapons, it's NATO-targeted weapons. As Dennis said, this isn't about to say, okay, we'll fire a Storm Shadow off. What's the difference between that and any other weapon system Ukraine has? Ukraine has had very good success using long-range drone systems and striking targets deep inside Russia. What's the difference between a Ukrainian drone system and a British or American-provided missile? The Ukrainian drone system is a Ukrainian weapon system directed by the Ukrainian government, and Russia will hold the Ukrainian government to account using whatever means it chooses to do so. This is the nature of conflict between two nations, and Russia and Ukraine are in a state of advanced conflict. Ukraine thinks of it as a war. Russia calls it a special military operation. That's a matter of semantics. They are in conflict with one another. NATO claims not to be a party to this conflict. And yet when NATO provides weapon systems that can only strike targets when the targets have been processed by NATO-only entities. That's what people need to understand here. It's not just a matter of programming a Storm Shadow missile. There is an element in Europe, part of NATO, that absorbs American intelligence information, overlays it with American mapping information, and turns it into the data necessary to strike a target. That data is loaded into the Storm Shadow. Because the Storm Shadow communicates with GPS, it doesn't do it on a commercial GPS signal. That's just a single channel. It can be jammed. It does it using the military channels. That's two channels. They're encrypted. They're encrypted by the United States using American encryption technology that has to be loaded into the systems by Americans, not by Ukrainians. Ukrainians are not cleared to operate this level of cryptographic keying material. So when a storm shadow is fired against a target inside Russia, it is literally being targeted by NATO. NATO is approving of the target and facilitating the use of this weapon system against the target. That means that NATO is a literal party to the conflict. And yet Keir Starmer wanted Joe Biden to sign off on this, to say, allow us to use this American intelligence so that we can strike targets inside Ukraine using the Storm Shadow missile. This is an act of war. And it's something that, had Keir Starmer signed off on, would have been implemented that night. It's not something that's going to happen down the road. It would have happened that night, Friday the 13th. And on Saturday the 14th, we would all have been dead. That's the point I'm trying to make here, people. It's not a joke. It's not a game. The Russians are not bluffing. Vladimir Putin made this clear on Thursday when it became evident that the United States was having this meeting with Starmer in the White House. And he basically said that if you do this, you will be a party to the conflict, and Russia will have to act accordingly. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson, reiterated this point, said the president has made this quite clear, but not clear enough because they still had the meeting. On Friday, the UN ambassador, or the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, in front of the Security Council in session, reiterated this point, that it will be a declaration of war if the United States and Great Britain enable Ukraine to use NATO-provided weapons to strike Russia. The Russian ambassador to the United States took it a step further. Anatoly Antonov said, if you think that a nuclear conflict will be limited to Europe, basically acknowledging that if this happens, Russia will use nuclear weapons against Europe. If you're an American and you think it will be limited to Europe, think again. We will strike you. You're playing with fire. Don't let your fingers get burned. Now, when he said this, it sent shockwaves through the American community. Former government officials, and if you know anything about how the establishment works, we have a whole host of former government officials who advise, who are in have connectivity with the current administration. They called Anatoly Antonov, and you have to ask yourself, why didn't the government call? Because we don't have connectivity with the Russians anymore. I was at the Russian embassy on Friday night. I was there at the invitation of Anatoly Antonov. I was there to attend a concert performance, a piano concert performance of Rimsky-Korsakov and other Russian composers, as part of Anatoly Antonov's effort to demonstrate to the American people the culture of Russia, to help detangle the Russophobia that has spun its web around the Americans. I've never seen the ambassador so distracted and so concerned. This was his big moment. He has been working for months to bring this concert in, to make this demonstration. And yet at this moment, his mind was elsewhere. And now I know where his mind was. He was uncertain whether or not he would live the day. He was uncertain what the United States would do. He had done his duty in articulating this, though, to the various former government administration who called the Biden administration and said, he's not bluffing. This is as real as it gets. If you sign this document, we will be at war with Russia, and the war will be a nuclear war. I don't know if you guys are hearing what I'm saying. We all almost died on Saturday. If you read Annie Jacobson's wonderful book, Nuclear War: A Scenario, it's a work of fiction, but it was written after consulting with former nuclear war planners, people who were in the system, who understood how nuclear war is fought. They understand how things are going. You know how long it takes for the world to end in a nuclear conflict? From start to finish, from the beginning of the initiation of events that lead to the first launch of a nuclear weapon until all life on Earth is forever destroyed, either instantly or things have been set in motion for the long, lingering death. 72 minutes. That's all it takes, ladies and gentlemen. 72 minutes. What are we going to do about this? This is the existential question of our time. What are we going to do about this? I think most people that are in attendance here share my fear, my concerns about the danger of nuclear war. But Joe Biden's not done. As Dennis Small said, he is going to meet with Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly debate, where they're going to talk about how to make this happen. What is needed to make this happen? The European Parliament, as Dennis said we want this to happen. Why? Because Europe believes that Russia is bluffing. Europe believes that Putin is bluffing. Europe doesn't believe that Russia would pull the trigger. I've been studying Russia my entire life. First as the Soviet Union, later in the decade of the 90s, and I've been watching Vladimir Putin very closely for 25 years. I've had the privilege of visiting Russia twice in the last year. I would have gone a third time, but the U.S. government stopped it. One of the reasons why they stopped it is because of the insights that I have gained by visiting Russia and speaking with Russians, Russian officials, Russian military officers, etc. I will say this: Russia doesn't bluff. Russia understands what war is more than anybody in the West does. Russia understands the sacrifices necessary to sustain a nation in times of existential crisis. And the Russians are not willing to allow NATO, the United States, or any of its proxies to put the Russian state at risk, to put the Russian nation at risk. And allowing Ukraine to use long-range NATO-provided systems targeted by NATO isn't just an extension of the Ukrainian warfighting capability. It gives NATO a preemptive strike capability. This is what people don't understand. Because if NATO can use Ukrainian weapons to take out strategic targets inside Russia, and then follow that up with a NATO strike, conventional in nature, designed to decapitate Russian leadership, and then follow that up with a wave of low-yield nuclear weapons, which are now integrated into the American arsenal and a part of our nuclear deployment plan. I don't know how many people understand that the former commander of United States Strategic Command, in speaking to Congress, said, "I prefer preemptive nuclear strike." Listen to what I'm saying. I prefer preemptive nuclear strike. That's his preferred way of doing war. Preemptive nuclear strike. And now you're a Russian listening to that, and you're watching NATO and the United States give Ukraine the ability to launch the first wave of preemptive action under the guise that it's just Ukraine, paralyzing the Russians so that the second wave, a NATO wave, comes in, decapitates, followed by a preemptive nuclear strike. And you're the Russians saying, what do we do about this? And what they do is they say we have to draw a line. And the line has been drawn. They are not bluffing. This is existential in nature. We have an election coming up in the United States. It's turning out to be one of the most important elections of our time, not because of abortion, not because of immigration, not because of the economy, not because of anything that everybody else is talking about, but because if we make it to the election, because there's a good chance we won't. There's a good chance we won't make it to next week. There's a good chance we won't make it to tomorrow, depending on decisions that are being made. But if we make it to the election, the person we elect is going to be the person that is either going to take us into World War III, a general nuclear strike, or is going to resolve the issue. Right now, there's only one candidate that's injecting the threat of nuclear war into the political debate. And that, of course, is Donald Trump. There's a lot of people out there that say they could never vote for Donald Trump. That's your prerogative. But if you don't want to vote for Donald Trump, at least exploit the fact that he's injected something into the political debate and make your candidate of choice respond. We have to inject a discussion about the dangers of nuclear war into the American political debate at this election. It must become the existential issue of this election. No other issue matters, because if there is a nuclear war and we're all dead, no other issue matters. We can't solve the issues of abortion, immigration, the economy, and other things else if there is no country, if there is no world. We have to stop this nuclear war. We all almost died last week. And again, I just want to make that point. If it weren't for some brave statements made by Russian government officials, from the president to the two ambassadors, Biden would have signed off. It's not they don't have the military capacity to do this. Now, if Russia is attacked, Russia has the capacity to defend, and their defense is active in nature, which means they will take the fight to you. But that's a fight that you started, not Russia. Russia's not organized to initiate offensive military operations against NATO, and politically they're not inclined to do so. So we need to stop this nonsense about, we have to hold on to Ukraine to defend Europe. If we don't fight them there, we're going to have to fight them here. That's a lie, a straight up lie. A straight up lie. So again, it's sad what's happening to Ukraine. I agree. But I believe it's Ukraine's fault and the West's fault for promoting this fight, to begin this fight. Didn't have to have a coup in 2014, didn't have to disregard Minsk, didn't have to ignore the Russian efforts in December 2021 for a new peace framework. You didn't have to do any of the things that we did. We didn't have to get in the way of the peace proposal that was ready to be implemented on April 1st, 2022. There are so many things we didn't have to do, but we did it, and we've lost. It's a failure. We're not going to win this war. It's done. There are 100,000 of more Ukrainians are going to die the longer this goes. You might kill a couple, maybe 100,000 more Russians. Yay. But you didn't win. Russia's not defeated. Ukraine will lose. That's the ultimate outcome. It's going to happen. Be adults about it, accept a defeat, and figure out how do we mitigate the consequences of this defeat to pursue a policy that doesn't result in nuclear war. And you can only do that by beginning to have negotiations with the Russians. So now we come back to there's a wonderful op-ed written by RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. Now, people can say whatever they want about that you're missing the point. If your response is, well, that's RFK, he's a vaccine guy, or he's this, or he's that, he's pro-Israel, you're missing the point. That just shows how stupid you are. I apologize for calling people stupid, but at this point, I almost died this past weekend because of your stupidity, so I don't care. You're stupid, really. And if that's Donald Trump Jr., he's the son, he's crazy, he's this, you're missing the point. What's the one thing that RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. can do that you can't do? Talk to Donald Trump. You see, because ultimately it's only Donald Trump's opinion that matters when it comes to Trump world. Wouldn't it be nice if what they wrote reflects the thinking that might be going on inside Camp Trump, when he's not getting assassinated or attempted assassination? What if Trump is actually thinking about how to bring an end to this war? How to prevent a nuclear war? I just want to remind you, we almost died past week because the current president's not thinking like that. And his hand-picked candidate, Kamala Harris, isn't thinking like that. Now, what if Donald Trump is thinking like that? You're still going to say, well, I don't want to vote for Trump. Okay, it's not election day. But wouldn't it be nice to have one side say, I'm looking to prevent a nuclear war, and have people say, this is a very important issue because we don't want to die. And suddenly Kamala Harris goes, whoa, how'd this become an issue? How'd this become an issue? People are talking about something that we weren't even thinking. It wasn't on our radar. We're gonna have the most lethal military in the force, and we're gonna continue to stand up to Putin. Her support goes down. She realizes the American people are serious about not having a nuclear war with Russia. And so she turns around and says, we got to change our policy. We got to mirror this, because she's done that before. You've seen she takes Trump's policies because they're popular and she makes them her own. So what if Kamala Harris made stopping a nuclear war her own policy? But now she has to do things. She has to turn to Biden and say, hey, you got to support me on this. Maybe send Blinken to Moscow. Maybe talk about New START treaty and how we can keep that alive. Maybe tone down the stupidity about long-range strike capabilities for Ukraine. Maybe tell the Ukrainians that they lost the war and grow up and get the best possible degree. Do something, because this has become an issue that's going to play out on November 5th. And now we have two sides. And what if they get in a bidding war? Who's going to be the best to stop a nuclear war with Russia? And now they start going back and forth. And next thing you know, peace is broken out all over. It ain't a pretty path to it, But it's a hell of a lot better. I just want to again remind you, we almost died on Saturday. It's not a joke, people. It almost happened. If Biden had signed off on that piece of paper with Keir Starmer on Friday in the White House, as he was planning to do, the paper that Karmer brought over in his little red box, you saw the photograph of him coming off the airplane carrying his little red official diplomatic communications, His Majesty's communications. That box contained the death warrant for you. For you. So stop being stupid about this. There's only one issue that matters come election day. Scott, Israel matters. Not if you're dead. Scott, abortion matters. Not if you're dead. Scott, my Second Amendment right. Not if you're dead. None of it matters if you're dead. And if there's a war between the United States and Russia, you're going to die. Stopping this war is the number one priority and has to be the number one priority of anybody who loves their country, loves their family, loves their kids, loves their dogs, loves going to the movie, loves enjoying life. Because if you had a good weekend, understand that you almost didn't. You were that close, one stroke of the pen from making that the worst weekend in your life. For many of you, it would have been a very short life because you would have died in a nuclear holocaust. For the rest of you, you would have been praying that you died in a nuclear holocaust as you watch disease befall your family, the people that you love starve to death, die of disease, as you watch your communities fall apart into chaos and anarchy. You kill your neighbor to get the food in their refrigerator. You have to kill your dog and eat your dog because you're out of food or because you don't want to see your dog suffer. You have to leave your home because you can't live anymore and start trudging through this nuclear wasteland. That's your future, ladies and gentlemen. That's your future. It's not a game. It's as real as it gets. So why don't you do something to stop it by maybe saying, hey, the ideas that are in that op-ed piece published in The Hill by RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr., we may not agree with those two people individually, but we agree with the concept of doing what's necessary to stop a war. It's not a surrender to Russia. Russia's not threatening to do anything other than make us listen to Rimsky-Korsakov music. Okay, that's what I had to do Friday night. I'm a rock and roll guy, but I went to listen because I wanted to send a signal that it's okay to listen to Russian music. It's okay to meet with the Russians. They're good people. It's okay to be humans with Russians. That's a future that we can all accept. It's not about Russia occupying us, dominating us, winning against us. They don't want that. They're not seeking that. They just want to live peacefully with us in an environment that says they appreciate who we are and we appreciate who they are. And there's no need for us to be killing one another. That's the world. I all their interviews. I've actually been on their show and I've interviewed them myself on my podcast. These are remarkable individuals. They claim to be pranksters. I'm telling you right now, the impact that they have on informing the public about the truth that these people don't want them to see, they're having a better impact than the Russian intelligence service, which leads me to believe that maybe they're actually secret Russian intelligence services agents, and because they're doing amazing things. It's called a prank, but a prank is sort of harmless. What did Sikorsky say? I mean, he acknowledged that Nord Stream 2 was attacked, probably by the United States. He said that at a minimum, we knew about it and we did nothing to stop it. I mean, this is a dangerous, dangerous man, Sikorsky. And he's saying things. Right now, you have people in the Polish government that are talking about prosecuting him for violating the secrecy acts, that he was saying things that were classified. He thought he was talking to Poroshenko, his fellow, anti-Russian conspirator. He's talking to Russian pranksters, but they weren't pranksters. These guys were exposing the truth. We can laugh about it. They did the same thing to Mike Pompeo. They've done it to just about everybody. And we can laugh about how clever, but listen to what they're exposing, the truths they're exposing. And you realize that we're being lied to 24/7 by our respective governments, whether it's the Polish government, the American government, the British government. They are incapable of trusting their citizens with the truth. Because if they were, then it wouldn't be the prank. Prank wouldn't work because they'd be finding out things that were already told to the general audience. Why is this important? Well, here in the United States, we have the U.S. government using the courts to attack free speech. I mean, they're coming after me. We just had a trial in Florida of the Uhura 3. One of the things that came out of that was the definition of disinformation. And that's an important term. You saw that Hillary Clinton used it in her interview with Rachel Maddow. We have to defeat misinformation. We have to defeat disinformation. And most people sit there and go, well, I mean, after all, shouldn't we support truth over lies? Sure. But what if the government's definition of disinformation has nothing to do with truth? What if the government's definition of disinformation is anything that deviates from the official narrative set forth by the government? And that's the definition that the U.S. courts embraced. Anything that deviates from the official narrative set forth by the U.S. government is disinformation. Just so you understand, let's put this in historical context. You were telling me before we went live that you saw an ABC interview about me in the lead up to the war and how I was saying that there was no weapons of mass destruction, etc. Truth, historical truth. We now know it. Even the people that didn't believe me then are saying, well, God, Scott, you were right then. Okay, God will give you that. That's disinformation. It's not the truth. See, I was guilty of disinformation. And if we had in place laws that said anybody who dares speak about, put out disinformation needs to be silenced, maybe criminally silenced, then the truths I was trying to tell to stop this war, I wouldn't have been allowed to say it because it's disinformation. That's the danger that we're in right now. Free speech is under attack. Just take a look at some of the insanity that's going on. Meta, the former Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has now yielded to pressure from the U.S. government to silence RT. He shut down Instagram in India because of the concerns that they were, promoting a Russian, pro-Russian narrative, and he's now shut down, Russia on Meta on Facebook. This isn't free speech. You can say, well, I don't agree with the Russian narrative. Fine, don't agree with it. Come up with a better narrative. Come up with a better point of view. But once you start suppressing free speech, it's over. The constitutional republic we call America is finished. And it's not me saying that. John F. Kennedy warned about this in April of 1961 in a speech he gave before the American Press Association. He said that, I might not be happy with what you write, but you have every right to, not just a right to write it, you have a duty. You have a duty to hold me to account, to criticize me, because from criticism, better decisions are made. And yet today we're not allowed to criticize. We're not allowed to question. We're not allowed to do our duty as American citizens. Now, I know there's a lot of foreigners out there that say, well, Scott, free speech, like in Russia, they say, well, we don't have free speech. You're Russia. That's okay. That's your business, not mine. China, I don't care. That's your business, not mine. America has free speech. It's one of the fundamental cornerstone rights we have as American citizens that helps define what this constitutional republic is. It helps make American democracy function. And when you remove free speech from this equation, we are no longer a constitutional republic. We are no longer the United States. We may call ourselves the United States, but we cease to function as the United States. And that's an outcome that I personally don't want to see. And so I think it's imperative that we allow all voices to be heard, that we respect ourselves and empower ourselves with the ability to discern between good argument and bad argument, sound facts and not so sound facts. It's a duty and responsibility that we all enjoy. And again, I just want to bring this full circle. We almost died this weekend. Why? Because many of us accept at face value the narrative being put forward by our government. And we view our efforts, or anybody's efforts to challenge that narrative, as not only counterproductive, but un-American. No. We almost died this last weekend because our government is promulgating policies based upon misperceptions, deceptions of the threat posed by Russia. We almost died this weekend because our government is lying to us. We have a duty and responsibility to expose these lies and to challenge these lies and compel our government to either change its policies or elect people that are capable of changing those policies. It's not interference in the American election to challenge these policies. It's not disinformation. It's what every American is supposed to do. when you have people whom we've elected to higher office to represent us, we have to hold them to account. And you can't hold them to account if your voice is silenced. Ukraine can't be a member of the EU. Ukraine will never be a member of the EU. I mean, the fact is, if the EU allowed Ukraine in, it would be the end of the EU. And it's just not going to happen. Ukraine doesn't meet any of the criterion required to be a member of the EU. It's totally incompatible. Every aspect of Ukraine is incompatible with the values that the EU claims that it embraces. It's economically, it's a wreck. It doesn't meet any of the economic requirements to be a member of the EU. It never will meet them. Ukraine's a destroyed nation. But this is part of the danger of this fantasy of Ukrainian membership in the EU, just like Ukrainian membership in NATO. I mean, you have, Biden, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Blinken, Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Stoltenberg, Ukraine will be no, it's not. It never will be. Isn't going to happen. Forget about it. Forget about it. It's just fantasy. It's the kind of stupidity linked to bad policy that has to be promulgated because you can't admit that you've made a mistake. That's it. And as long as we allow Volodymyr Zelensky to parade around, in the form of the Ukrainian president, even though his term has expired, he has no legitimacy. He's being challenged not just by the Russians, but by his own party, opposition party. His own people are going to the courts saying, get him out of there. He's not the president. He has no legitimacy. As long as we allow this guy to parade around and we wrap him with the mantle of legitimacy, we're going to have these kinds of discussions which aren't conducive. Let's clear the air. Let's start off, imagine if we had a discussion where we said, Ukraine isn't going to be a member of the EU. Ukraine isn't going to be a member of NATO. And Ukraine has lost this war and isn't going to win this war. What are we going to do about it? Changes everything, doesn't it? Suddenly you're realistic and you go, well, we need to bring an end to this war and salvage what we can of Ukraine and I guess promote neutrality and see what we can do to rebuild Ukraine so that it can function as a neutral member of the broader European global community. Okay, now we're talking. But as long as we put forward these absurdities, Ukraine's going to be a member of the EU. How? You can't articulate how that's going to happen. Ukraine's going to be a member of NATO. How? Russia will never allow that. Well, we're going to strategically defeat Russia. How are you going to do that without Russia destroying you with nuclear weapons? Well, I don't want to talk about that. We need to become real. We need to be very real about these, the facts. And the facts are Ukraine has lost this war. They're not going to win this war. They're never going to be a member of the EU. They're never going to be a member of NATO. You start with that, the solution starts to write itself. A turning point occurred long before that. Kursk is just the last act. Look, the turning point of World War II, the war between Nazi Germany and the Alliance, was the Battle of Kursk in 1943. At that point in time, Germany exhausted its strategic reserves. It had no ability to reconstitute these reserves, and the war was irretrievably lost. And yet Germany was able to launch an attack, the Battle of the Bulge, this offensive, in a desperate attempt to change the outcome of the battle on the Western Front. You can't call the Battle of the Bulge a turning point in the war. The war was already lost by the time that was fought. Kursk is not a turning point in the war. It's the last desperate act by a nation that has strategically lost this conflict. They committed their strategic reserves into this Kursk offensive. The offensive is stalled, and now the Ukrainians are being slaughtered, wiped out, annihilated. And in doing so, they made the war actually shorter, just like we don't know how much longer Germany could have survived if it didn't sacrifice thousands of tanks, a tremendous amount of ammunition, artillery, and manpower. What could they have done with a more mobile reserve on the Western Front to stop the deep penetrations? Could they have diverted that some to slow down the Russian advance, in Prussia? They've extended the war into, instead of finishing in early May, could they have lasted another month, June? Could they have taken it to July? Could they have taken it to August? Probably. They still would have lost. They weren't going to win. But by expending those reserves, sacrificing on the battlefield, they made it impossible to hold on the East. Look at that movie Downfall, when Hitler's, where's Steiner? Let's move this army. Where's the Ninth Army? How come they're not doing this? Well, they didn't exist. What if they did exist? he still would have lost the battle. But he could have blocked. They could have done this. They could have evacuated. They could have done things. Those options were taken away because the strategic reserve was squandered in the Ardennes offensive. The Ukrainian strategic reserve is squandered in the Kursk offensive. Now they've eliminated possibilities. Later on, Zelensky might be down in a bunker, going, where's Syrskyi? Where's this? Where's this? Where's that? They don't exist, boss. You send them to Kursk and they're all dead. And we got nothing left and the Russians are broken through. That's the reality of what's going on right now. Look, I'm going to be as serious as I am. I've said this on other podcasts. I'll say it here. I just hope that everybody in your audience knows, you yourself, are you married? I don't mean to ask personal questions.